A mid-afternoon flight across Europe. The economy cabin is packed to the brim and the air is stifling. A woman in a high-end designer suit walks unsteadily down the aisle. Passengers think she is just tired until she collapses onto the floor. The flight attendants panic and shout for medical help. No one stands up in the back row. A single dad quietly unbuckles his seatbelt. He kneels beside the woman with an unnatural calmness. He says one sentence that silences the entire cabin. "She's not drunk, she's crashing." And just minutes later, everyone realizes this man is anything but ordinary. Meet Daniel Foster, 41 years old, a single dad traveling across Europe with a heavy heart and a worn-out jacket. He is sitting in a cramped economy seat right by the wing. He looks like any other blue-collar worker returning home after a short-term job. He lives a quiet life and never talks about his past. To the passengers around him, he is just another invisible face in the crowd. Earlier, a flight attendant asked him to straighten his seat with a sharp, impatient tone. Daniel simply apologized and complied without a single word of protest. He is a man who knows how to be silent. He spent the last week working manual labor just to save every cent for his daughter's future. Daniel observes the cabin with a precision most people lack. He notices the way the air pressure changes. He hears the subtle shift in the engine hum, but mostly he watches the people. He notices the woman in row 5. She is wearing a suit that costs more than his car, but her hands are shaking slightly. She is breathing too shallowly, and her skin has a gray undertone. Daniel recognizes the signs of a body under extreme stress. He feels a familiar instinct kicking in, but he remains in his seat. He knows the world judges people like him, so he stays in the shadows. He watches her stand up to reach for the overhead bin, then stumble. She regains her balance, but her eyes are glassy. Daniel counts her pulse from a distance just by watching the vein in her neck. He knows a crisis is coming, yet he hopes he is wrong. The man next to Daniel complains about the lack of legroom, but Daniel doesn't hear him. His focus is locked on the woman. He sees her move toward the aisle, and he knows this is the moment her system will fail. She takes 2 steps and the world goes black for her. The sound of her body hitting the carpeted floor is heavy and final. Daniel is already moving his hands toward his buckle before the first scream even erupts. He is the only one who isn't surprised. Daniel remembers the heat of the desert, the smell of sand mixed with iron, and the way a human life can flicker like a candle in a storm. This isn't his first time seeing someone disappear into the void, but it feels different in this pressurized tube of aluminum. His mind starts a diagnostic checklist automatically. Airway, breathing circulation, disability exposure. He looks at his daughter's photo inside his wallet one last time before he stands up. She is the reason he retired from the front lines, but she is also the reason he can't let someone else's parent die today. He thinks about the unpaid bills at home, the leak in the kitchen ceiling, and the way the rich world usually ignores people like him. Yet here he is, moving toward a woman who represents everything he doesn't have. He notices the texture of the carpet, the way the cabin lights flicker ever so slightly, and the frozen expressions of the people in first class who are too shocked to breathe. The silence of the cabin is a weight he knows well. It is the same silence that precedes an explosion on a dusty road in a country far away. He pushes through the invisible barrier of social class and steps into the light of the aisle. Daniel's mind flashes back to a night in Kandahar, where the only light came from tracers, and the only sound was the rhythmic thumping of a dying engine. He remembers holding a young private's hand, telling him about the rain in London, just to keep him from slipping away into the darkness. That private never made it home, and that failure is a ghost that follows Daniel into every room he enters. Even here in the hum of a commercial jet, he can feel the cold breath of that night. He looks at the woman on the floor, and he doesn't see a billionaire. He sees a patient, a human heart that is forgetting its rhythm. He feels the collective gaze of the passengers. It is a mixture of annoyance and morbid curiosity. A teenager in row 12 is already live streaming the scene, with a bored expression. Daniel feels a flash of anger, but he suppresses it immediately. Anger is a luxury he cannot afford. Right now he needs focus, he needs clarity, and he needs the world to get out of his way. He feels the vibration of the aircraft through the soles of his boots, and he uses it to ground himself. He knows that in 5 minutes this cabin will either be a scene of a miracle or a crime scene, and he is the only one who can decide which one it will be. He closes his eyes for a split second, sensing the cabin's frequency. He hears the air recyclers working harder, trying to compensate for the humidity of 200 nervous souls. He smells the faint metallic tang of the oxygen system standing by. It's a sensory overload that would paralyze most people. But for Daniel, it's just the environment of the job he swore he'd never do again. The woman lies motionless in the aisle. The lead flight attendant rushes over her face, pale with fear. She screams, "Is there a doctor on board? Please, we need a doctor." No one answers. A businessman in the front row pulls his legs back, afraid of getting involved. Others start filming with their phones, but nobody moves to help. Daniel stands up and steps into the aisle. He doesn't run. He walks with a steady, calculated pace. He introduces himself briefly, but the crew looks at him with deep suspicion. He isn't wearing a uniform. He doesn't have a medical bag. His clothes are old and he looks exhausted. The attendant tries to push him back, saying, "Sir, please stay in your seat. We are waiting for a professional." Daniel looks her in the eye and his gaze is like cold steel. He says, "You don't have time to wait. Move aside." He kneels down and checks her vitals with fingers that don't tremble. He checks her pupils and her breathing rate. He ignores the whispers from passengers calling him a fraud. Daniel demands oxygen and sugar water immediately. The flight attendant hesitates, but the authority in his voice is undeniable. She runs to get the kit. Daniel begins to perform specific maneuvers to keep her airway clear and stabilize her blood flow. He tells the co-pilot, who has come back to watch, "Clear these people out of the first 3 rows. I need space, and I need the cabin temperature drop now." The co-pilot sees the way Daniel is working. His hands are moving with the grace of someone who has done this 1,000 times in the dark. Daniel discovers she is suffering from acute hypotension, combined with severe dehydration and likely an underlying heart condition. He starts a rhythmic sequence of pressure points and cooling techniques. Every move he makes is precise and follows a protocol. Most doctors wouldn't even know in a field setting. The cabin becomes a theater of life and death, and Daniel is the director. The businessman who complained earlier is now staring in silence, realizing the nobody from the back row is currently the most important person in the sky. Daniel feels the sweat on the woman's forehead. It is clammy and cold, the classic signature of a system shutting down. He remembers a soldier named Miller who had the same look after a shrapnel wound. Daniel had to keep Miller alive for 6 hours in a ditch, with nothing but a canteen of water and a prayer. He uses that same focus now, blocking out the sound of a crying baby and the nervous chatter of the passengers. He speaks to the woman even though she is unconscious. "Stay with me, Elena. Focus on my voice." He doesn't know her name yet, but he uses a name from his past to keep his own heart steady. The flight attendant returns with a medical kit that is woefully undersupplied, but Daniel doesn't complain. He adapts. He uses a rolled-up magazine to elevate her legs and a wet towel from the galley to regulate her core temperature. He is a master of improvisation, a man who can perform miracles with scrap metal and shear. Will he feels the judgment of the crowd shifting from skepticism to a desperate hope? They are all passengers on the same ship now, and they realize their safety depends on the man with the grease under his fingernails. He hears a passenger whisper, "He looks like a mechanic," and Daniel thinks to himself, "I am a mechanic of the human soul." He feels the slight flutter of her pulse, returning a tiny victory in a war that is far from over. He knows the next 10 minutes will decide if she walks off this plane or is carried off in a bag. Daniel's peripheral vision captures the panic of the crew. They are whispering about an emergency landing and the cost of diverting the flight. He ignores them all. He is listening to the woman's lungs, searching for the sound of fluid, searching for the sound of life. He performs a precordial thump, a move of last resort that makes the entire cabin gasp. It is a violent act of love intended to shock the heart back into its duty. For a second, the world stops turning. Then, a small ragged breath escapes her lips, and the gray mask on her face begins to crack. He feels the heat returning to her skin, and he knows he has won a few more minutes, but the battle is still raging inside her chest. He looks up at the flight attendant, and his voice is a low growl. "Tell the pilot to drop the altitude another 1,000 feet if he can. The air is too thin for her right now." The authority in his command is so absolute that the co-pilot doesn't even question the logistics. He simply turns and runs back to the cockpit. Daniel is no longer a passenger. He is the commander of this flight, and every soul on board knows it. The lead flight attendant, who had been so dismissive earlier, is now acting as his shadow, anticipating his every need without him having to ask. She sees the way he looks at the patient, not as a celebrity, but as a puzzle of biology that must be solved. She realizes that her initial judgment of this man was the biggest mistake of her career. She watches as he checks the refill time on the woman's fingernails, a small detail that shows the depth of his combat training. Daniel identifies the exact moment her heart skips a beat. He instructs the attendant on how to assist him step by step in the narrow space. He is calm while everyone else is losing their minds. He manages to stabilize her blood pressure without the use of advanced hospital equipment. Under his care, the woman's eyes flutter open, and the gray color begins to leave her face. A passenger in row 4 gasps as she recognizes the woman's face. This isn't just a traveler. She is a world-famous billionaire CEO, a woman who controls empires. The news spreads through the cabin in a frantic whisper. The billionaire is staring at Daniel, her vision blurry and confused. The flight attendant looks at Daniel in total shock and asks the question everyone is thinking. "Sir, who are you?" Freeze moment. Daniel looks down at his scarred hands, then back at the crew. He says, "I used to be a combat paramedic and an emergency medical trainer. I left the service to raise my daughter alone." The co-pilot reports the situation to the captain, who decides to divert the flight to the nearest airport to ensure her safety. The entire cabin falls into a profound silence. Every eye is fixed on the single dad in the frayed jacket. They realize they didn't just see a rescue, they saw a master at work. The woman tries to speak, but Daniel places a gentle hand on her shoulder and says, "Don't talk yet. Your body is still catching up to your heart. Stay with me." The billionaire CEO, who usually has 1,000 people at her command, is now completely dependent on a man she wouldn't have looked at twice on the street. Daniel stays on the floor with her for the next 40 minutes, ignoring the cramps in his legs. He is monitoring her pulse every 60 seconds with the devotion of a guardian. The passengers who were filming are now lowering their phones out of a strange sense of respect. They see the fatherly tenderness in his eyes mixed with the cold efficiency of a soldier. The silence in the plane is no longer filled with fear. It is filled with awe for the man from seat 32F. Daniel remembers the day he handed in his stripes, the day his wife's funeral ended, and he realized he couldn't be a hero to the world and a father to his girl at the same time. He chose the girl, but today, the world came knocking on his door again. He sees the billionaire's expensive jewelry catching the cabin light, and it feels surreal that he is holding the hand of a woman who could buy the hospital he can't afford. He wonders if she knows the price of a gallon of milk or the sound of a debt collector's voice. But as he looks into her eyes, he sees only a human being, terrified of the dark. He realizes that at 30, somewhere under we're 0 feet, money has no value, only oxygen and kindness matter. He feels the plane begin its descent, the tilt of the floorboards as they head for an emergency landing in Munich. The co-pilot whispers to him, "The captain says you saved the airline a massive lawsuit and a tragedy." Daniel doesn't care about the airline. He only cares that the woman's breathing is becoming rhythmic again. He watches the clouds pass by the window and thinks about the school play he might miss because of this delay. He hopes his daughter will understand that some missions can't be aborted. He feels a strange peace, as if the ghosts of the soldiers he couldn't save are finally letting him go, because he saved this one woman. He looks at the businessman who was filming, and the man looks away in shame. Daniel doesn't feel superior, he just feels tired. The weight of the moment is settling into his bones, but his hands remain steady on her wrist, a human bridge between life and death. Daniel starts to tell her a story about his daughter, about how she likes to collect seashells and how she thinks the moon follows her car. He does this to keep her brain engaged, to keep her tethered to the reality of the living. The woman's hand grips his with a strength that surprises him. It is the grip of a drowning person finding a lifeline. He feels the sudden pressure change in his ears as the plane dives through the clouds, and he uses his body to shield her from the vibrations of the landing gear extending. He is a human shock absorber, a man who has learned to carry the weight of the world so others don't have to. He looks at the flight attendant and gives her a rare tired smile. She's going to make it, just get the ambulance ready on the tarmac. The flight attendant nods, her eyes filled with a new kind of respect, the kind you only give to legends. She thinks about how she almost kicked this man out of the aisle 20 minutes ago, and she feels a lump in her throat. She watches him check the time on a cheap plastic watch that has seen better days, a stark contrast to the diamond-encrusted timepiece on the woman's limp wrist. He is a man who measures time in heartbeats, not dollars. The woman is now fully conscious and sitting up, leaning against the bulkhead. She holds Daniel's hand and thanks him with tears in her eyes. She introduces herself properly, Elena Vance. But Daniel just nods. He isn't impressed by her billions, he is just glad she is breathing. The passengers, who were indifferent or judgmental earlier, are now overwhelmed with guilt. Several people stand up to offer their seats or water. One man even apologizes for his earlier comments about Daniel's appearance. The head flight attendant makes a public announcement over the speaker, thanking the gentleman from the back for his heroic actions. A spontaneous burst of applause breaks out, filling the cabin with a thunderous sound. Daniel doesn't take a bow. He simply stands up, brushes the dust off his pants, and walks back to his original seat. He sits down and puts his seatbelt back on as if nothing happened. He closes his eyes and leans his head against the window again. He isn't looking for a reward or a headline. If you believe real heroes don't announce themselves, type "I will live kindly." In the comments below, Daniel returns to his world of silence while the billionaire CEO watches him from the front, her life forever changed by a man who asked for nothing. He hears the woman in row 6 offering him her premium snack box, but he politely declines. He doesn't want to be the center of attention. He just wants the noise to stop and the flight to end. He feels the businessman from 11B leaning over to try and strike up a conversation, asking what kind of combat he saw. Daniel simply replies, "The kind you never want to see," and the conversation ends there. He is a man who has outgrown the need for external validation. He knows what he is worth, and it isn't measured by the clapping of strangers. He thinks about the irony of the situation, how an hour ago he was being treated like a nuisance, and now he is being treated like a saint. He knows that both versions are false. He is just a man who did what was necessary. He feels the plane touch the runway, the sudden roar of the reverse thrusters, and the braking that signals the end of the crisis. He watches Elena being helped into a wheelchair by the ground medics, and she looks back at him one last time, searching for his face in the crowd. Daniel gives her a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then he disappears back into his thoughts. He is already planning the bus ride home and the dinner he needs to cook. He is a father first and a hero only when the world leaves him no choice. The cabin lights seem brighter now, as if the darkness has been purged by his actions. He sees the passengers talking to each other for the first time, not as strangers, but as a community that witnessed something sacred. He hears a young mother telling her son, "Look at that man, he is what a real soldier looks like." Daniel closes his eyes tightly, wishing he could tell them he is just a man who is tired of losing people. He feels the plane taxiing to a stop and the sound of the engines. Dying down feels like a heavy blanket being pulled over the world. He knows the media will try to find him, but he is already calculating the fastest exit from the airport. He is a ghost who only appears when the light fails, and he is happy to return to the shadows. The flight attendant who had been his assistant throughout the ordeal comes by and leaves a small piece of paper on his tray table. It says, "I'm sorry for earlier. Thank you for showing me what a real hero looks like." Daniel doesn't read it until she is gone, but he keeps the paper, tucking it into the same pocket as his daughter's photo. The plane lands safely and medical teams are waiting at the gate. Elena Vance refuses to leave until she speaks to Daniel again. She offers him money, a new house, and a position in her company. Daniel looks at her and thinks of his daughter waiting at home. He refuses the grand gifts. He tells her, "I don't need a reward for being human. I just want a stable job so I can be home for my girl every night." Elena smiles and accepts his wish without further questions. She realizes that his dignity is worth more than her fortune. Daniel leaves the airport, quietly avoiding the cameras and the social media buzz. The story doesn't come from the news. It comes from the 200 passengers who went home and told their families about the angel in the frayed jacket. Daniel walks out of the terminal and disappears into the crowd, just another father going home. She fainted as a billionaire. She woke up as a human being. And a quiet father reminded everyone what calm courage looks like. He is the proof that the most powerful people are often the ones we choose not to see. A few weeks later, a letter arrives at Daniel's small apartment. It isn't a check or a deed to a house. It is a job offer from a nonprofit foundation dedicated to veteran health and child welfare. The salary is modest, but the hours are perfect, and the mission is clear. Daniel smiles as he reads the bottom of the letter, where it says, "Because some heroes deserve to be home for the front row of a school play." He looks at his daughter, who is practicing her lines for the upcoming show, and he realizes that he didn't just save Elena Vance. He saved himself. He saved the part of him that still believed the world could be kind. He goes to the kitchen and starts making tea, the steam rising in the quiet afternoon. He is no longer the invisible man. He is a man who is seen by the people who matter. He hears the sound of a plane flying high above, and he doesn't feel the urge to look up. He is grounded, he is home, and he is at peace. The billionaire CEO continues to run her empire, but now she does it with a different heart. She spends her weekends volunteering at the clinics Daniel helped inspire, and she never flies without thinking of seat 32F. The story of the single dad becomes a legend, a whisper of hope in a world that often feels too cold to care. And as the sun sets over the city, Daniel tucks his daughter into bed, her small hand in his. He knows that no amount of gold can match the warmth of a life lived with honor. He is Daniel Foster, a quiet father, and he has everything he ever needed. Daniel sits on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the grass. He remembers the cold desert nights and the way he used to pray for just one more hour of life. Now he has a lifetime, and it belongs to the girl sleeping inside. He realizes that the billionaire's collapse wasn't a tragedy, it was a bridge. It was the way the universe reminded him that his skills weren't meant for war. They were meant for life. He feels the cool night air, and it smells of jasmine and rain far from the smoke of Kandahar. He is a man who found his way back from the edge, and he did it by reaching out his hand to someone who had fallen. He smiles thinking about the school play tomorrow and the way he will be sitting in the very front row, exactly where he promised to be. He is no longer hiding his past. He is using it to build a future. And that is the greatest victory of all. The world is noisy and complicated, but in this small corner of the planet, there is a father, a daughter, and a peace that was earned in the clouds. Daniel closes his eyes, and for the first time, the ghosts are quiet. They are finally at rest, and so is he. He remembers the flight attendant's note and realizes that every person he saved today was a way of healing the person he couldn't save years ago. He realizes that kindness is the only language that doesn't need a translation, and that a frayed jacket can hide a soul of pure gold. He watches the stars, and for the first time in 15 years, he isn't counting the seconds until the next explosion. He is just counting his blessings. If stories like this touched you, subscribe to Chip Healing Stories. We tell the ones that shouldn't be forgotten.